Video follows after a previous video in which we were asking the question where to site your garden. And now that we figured that out, we can ask the question of what might we actually grow in. And some of the main options would just be that you could grow in a container, in a raised bed, or just in a regular garden plot in the ground. Some of the benefits to container gardening, let's dig into that first. Container gardening can be great for new gardeners because it's a contained space. You have more control over what you're doing, and it's just smaller. You don't have to figure out how to work the ground. It's also great for those with limited mobility. Maybe they can only get to their back porch, so that would be great for them. It's great for small spaces like those back porches or balconies. If you have a space that you're wanting to fill with more plants, then potted plants can really beautify that space. And then also there are other advantages too for plants that are really aggressive and might have spreading roots, things like mint, for instance, or sunchokes. Maybe that's something that you've heard of before. Those plants don't necessarily play nice. They want to spread out, so it can be great to keep them in a container. Some other things to note about containers when you are using them, it's really good to have some kind of drainage in whatever pot you're using. So if you're using a plastic container, you can just drill holes in the bottom of it if they don't already have some. And then some other things to note too that aren't listed on this slide is that it's great to fill containers with a potting soil mix, not just regular soil out of the ground. And one homemade mix that you could use would be 1 part compost that you purchase, 1 part peat moss, and 2 parts of just that regular garden soil. And that would get you a pretty good mix for any container that you're using. And also you can use a potting soil mix like that over multiple seasons. You just would want to add some fertilizer a little bit for each planting at the beginning of the year. And of course, when you're growing in containers, be sure that you're thinking about having the right size container for the right plant. So, if you're growing tomatoes or cucumbers, you would want a decent sized pot because those are going to become quite large sprawling plants, and you would only want to have maybe 1 plant in a sizable pot. But if you're growing something smaller like onions or radishes, you can get away with having a smaller container and maybe having several in there. Okay, and then the other thing to bring up is raised beds. We're going to get into growing in the ground in future videos, but raised beds have become a really popular option as well. They're kind of like a sort of container in and of themselves, they're just a bigger one. And there's a wide range of materials that you can use and dimensions for raised beds. Some gardeners create raised beds that are just a few inches or a foot tall, as opposed to something that's like a 4-foot tall bed. I think a main reason people like raised beds is because it establishes a well-defined space. This can help with keeping pathways clean, and they're also good for areas with very poor soil. With that well-defined space too, it's nice because it just creates a defined walking space, maybe where children aren't supposed to go and all of that. So, so when you do have an area with poor soil, kind of maybe in a cityscape like this picture is indicating, a raised bed can create a nice space for good drainage and all of that. So, as you can see too, raised beds are a great option too for people with limited mobility. It's important to note though that building and filling raised beds can be expensive and it can take time. So unless some of these points are really compelling for you, I'd suggest you just try growing in the ground and fence it in. So that is it for growing in containers and raised beds. I hope you find this helpful, and I'll see you in the next video.